The longest undefended border in the world, a symbol of a century of peace and unparalleled prosperity, is now the front line of a global trade war. President Donald Trump has issued a digital ultimatum that could effectively sever the economic arteries of the continent, a 100% tariff on all Canadian goods. At the heart of this storm lies a high-stakes gamble by Ottawa to appease Beijing, a move Washington views as a betrayal of the Continental Alliance. As supply chains tremble and the specter of a total trade freeze looms, we analyze the moment the Great White North found itself caught between a rising superpower and an America First juggernaut. The digital thunderbolt, an alliance under siege. The silence of a winter morning in Ottawa was shattered not by a diplomatic cable, but by a series of high-decibel posts from Mar-a-Lago. President Donald Trump, utilizing the raw power of social media as a tool of statecraft, has signaled what many are calling the existential moment for the Canadian economy. The threat is as simple as it is devastating. A total 100% tariff on every single item crossing the border from Canada into the United States. This isn't just a tax on lumber or steel, it is an economic blockade designed to force a sovereign neighbor into submission. For decades, the U.S.-Canada relationship was the gold standard of bilateral cooperation. But today, that history feels like a distant memory as the Trump administration shifts from Buy American to a policy of comply or collapse. The catalyst for this sudden escalation is a controversial trade pivot orchestrated by the Canadian government under Prime Minister Mark Carney. In a bid to protect its domestic agricultural sector, Canada recently negotiated a deal with China, slashing tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles from a staggering 100% down to a mere 6.1%. In exchange, Beijing agreed to lift its retaliatory restrictions on Canadian canola, lobster, and crab, industries that are the lifeblood of the Canadian prairies and the Atlantic coast. To Ottawa, it was a pragmatic survival tactic to save its farmers. To Donald Trump, it was a Trojan horse maneuver. The president's rhetoric has been blistering, accusing Canada of allowing itself to be swallowed whole by China and acting as a backdoor for subsidized Chinese technology to flood the American market, undermining U.S. manufacturing at its very core. This confrontation does not exist in a vacuum. It follows a pattern of escalating pressure that began earlier in 2025 when Washington imposed a 25% blanket tariff on Canada and Mexico, citing failures to secure borders and stop the flow of fentanyl. However, the move to 100% represents a quantum leap in hostility. The logic from the Oval Office is clear. North America must be a fortress, and any crack in the walls, especially one open for Beijing, will be sealed with the full weight of American economic might. The threat has sent shockwaves through the TSX and the loonie as investors grapple with the reality that the United States is willing to sacrifice the USMCA framework to achieve its geopolitical goals. The drama unfolding is more than a policy dispute. It is a clash of visions. On one side, Mark Carney's government is attempting to navigate a multipolar world where trade with China is an inescapable necessity for resource-rich nations. On the other, the Trump administration views the world through a binary lens. You are either with the American industrial renaissance, or you are an instrument of Chinese expansionism. As the rhetoric intensifies, the narrative of the friendly neighbor to the north is being replaced by the image of a security risk and a trade loophole. This first chapter of the conflict sets a grim stage. We are no longer talking about minor adjustments to dairy quotas or automotive parts. We are witnessing an attempt to fundamentally decouple the Canadian economy from the global supply chains it has spent decades building, all under the shadow of a president who views trade surplus as the only metric of success. The continental fracture, chains, grains, and the cost of defiance. The economic architecture of North America, a complex web of just-in-time supply chains and shared industrial DNA, is currently staring into an abyss. For decades, the border was a formality for commerce, with 85% of Canadian exports flowing south as seamlessly as the Great Lakes. But the 100% tariff threat has turned that border into a 5,000-mile-long guillotine. We are witnessing an unprecedented rupture in the continental order, where the special relationship has been replaced by a coercive partnership. To analyze the overall picture is to see a continent at war with its own prosperity. President Trump's America First doctrine has evolved into a continental siege, demanding that Canada choose between its sovereign right to trade and its access to the world's largest consumer market. This isn't just a policy shift, it is the dismantling of the post-World War II rules-based trade system in real time. The negative impacts are immediate and catastrophic. For Canada, the automotive heartland of Ontario is the first casualty. The Windsor-Detroit corridor, where parts cross the border up to 7 times before a car is finished, cannot survive a 100% tax. Experts warn that if these threats materialize, the Canadian auto industry, which supports hundreds of thousands of jobs, could evaporate overnight. It's not just cars, metal manufacturing, machinery, and energy sectors are in the crosshairs. But the blowback hits the American side just as hard. The U.S. consumer, already weary from years of inflationary pressure, would face a tariff tax on everything from Canadian lumber for their homes to electricity and oil for their cities. Supply chains would buckle as American factories, dependent on Canadian raw materials, find their inputs doubled in price, potentially triggering a manufacturing recession in the very Rust Belt states the president aims to protect. Yet, there is a bitter irony in the livelihoods of those caught in the middle. In the Canadian prairies and the Atlantic provinces, the deal with Beijing was seen as a rescue mission. Farmers and fishers who had been devastated by Chinese retaliatory duties on canola and lobster finally saw a path to solvency. Now that lifeline has become a noose. They are the human collateral in a high-stakes geopolitical poker game, saved from Beijing's wrath only to be targeted by Washington's fury. Conversely, the Trump administration argues the positive impact is long-term, forcing a total reshoring of industry to American soil and closing the back door that allows Chinese state-subsidized technology to bypass U.S. defenses. From the White House perspective, this is a short-term shock for a 100-year gain, a necessary surgical strike to ensure North American self-reliance. Proposed solutions are currently as polarized as the rhetoric. Within Ottawa, Prime Minister Mark Carney has pivoted to a buy-Canadian defensive posture, urging citizens to focus on what we can control. This strategy envisions a Canada that builds big, from housing to military hardware, using its own steel, aluminum, and technology. It is a bold, perhaps desperate, attempt to cultivate a Fortress Canada to match Fortress America. Meanwhile, some trade analysts suggest a middle path, a regional North American exclusion zone for Chinese EVs that satisfies U.S. security concerns while allowing Canada to maintain its agricultural exports to the east. However, with the Trump administration demanding total alignment on projects like the Golden Dome missile defense over Greenland, the solution may no longer be found in trade spreadsheets, but in a complete surrender of Canadian foreign policy autonomy. The cost of sovereignty has never been higher, and for the workers on the assembly lines in Brampton or the docks in Halifax, the question is no longer about profit. It is about survival. The geopolitical pivot, sovereignty in the shadow of giants. As the snow blankets the Parliament Hill in Ottawa, the air is thick with a tension not felt since the War of 1812. The conflict has transitioned from a mere trade dispute into a profound crisis of national identity and geopolitical alignment. At the center of this storm is the volatile chemistry between two leaders with irreconcilable worldviews. Donald Trump, the populist insurgent of America First, and Mark Carney, the technocratic statesman who has emerged as a global champion for a rules-based order. This is no longer just about the price of canola or the assembly of electric vehicles. It is a battle for the soul of the North American alliance. The Trump administration that has fundamentally shifted its posture toward Canada, moving from treating it as a junior partner to framing it as a strategic liability, a drop-off port for Chinese influence that threatens the very security of the United States. The drama reached a fever pitch at the World Economic Forum in Davos, where Carney delivered a speech that was widely interpreted as a manifesto for middle powers. Without naming Trump, Carney argued that the era of relying on a single mercurial superpower was ending, and that nations must find their own table or be on the menu. This rhetorical defiance struck a nerve in Washington. President Trump's response was swift and personal. revoking Carney's invitation to the newly formed Board of Peace and mockingly referring to him as Governor Carney. A direct jab at Carney's past as a central banker and a subtle suggestion that the Prime Minister is little more than an administrator of a Northern American territory. This was followed by the circulation of a digital map from the White House showing Canada, Greenland, and even Venezuela under the American flag, a visual representation of a new, aggressive Monroe Doctrine that seeks to absorb the continent into a single, U.S.-led political and economic orbit. From a geopolitical lens, the China-Canada deal is a masterclass in the middle power trap. By lowering tariffs on Chinese EVs to 1%, Carney attempted to leverage Canada's critical mineral wealth and its agricultural exports to create a more predictable relationship with Beijing, balancing against the volatility of Washington. However, this diversification strategy has been weaponized by the Trump administration to justify a total reevaluation of the USMCA. The zombie USMCA, as analysts call it, is currently staggering toward a mandatory review in July 2026. Trump has signaled that the agreement is irrelevant if it allows China to use Canada as a backdoor. The technical battleground here is the rules of origin. Washington is demanding near impossible levels of North American content for any goods entering the U.S., effectively trying to force Canada to decouple its supply chains from the East entirely. If Canada refuses, it faces a 100% tariff that would not only destroy its trade surplus, but potentially trigger a 4.2% collapse in its GDP and the loss of up to 700,000 jobs. Yet this isn't just a Canadian tragedy, it is a global inflection point. If the United States succeeds in using 100% tariffs to dictate the foreign policy of its closest ally, the very concept of middle power sovereignty is dead. The taco effect, the market's assumption that Trump always chickens out, is fading as the administration demonstrates a willingness to endure domestic inflationary pain to achieve long-term industrial reshoring. For American consumers, the Canada tax would be a brutal reality, increasing the cost of everything from housing to heating oil, as 60% of U.S. crude and 85% of its electricity imports originate from the north. The world is watching to see if Canada will bend to the 51st state rhetoric or if it will successfully lead a coalition of nations, including a wary Mexico and a fragmented Europe, to create a new economic architecture that doesn't rely on the whims of the Oval Office. The stakes are nothing less than the future of the West. Will it remain a partnership of sovereign democracies, or will it become a centralized economic fortress governed by the law of the strongest? The new North American order. Survival, solidarity, and the Great Reset. As we stand on the precipice of a total economic divorce, the proposed solutions have shifted from diplomatic niceties to a survivalist's manifesto. The America First juggernaut has left Ottawa with no choice but to accelerate its own transformation into a fortress Canada. Prime Minister Mark Carney's strategy is no longer about balancing the scales between Washington and Beijing. It is about building a domestic engine powerful enough to withstand the shocks of a 100% tariff world. This involves a massive state-led investment in housing, defense, and high-tech manufacturing, utilizing Canada's vast critical mineral reserves, lithium, cobalt, and nickel, as a strategic shield. The message to Washington is clear. If you block our cars and our grain, we will withhold the raw materials essential for your green energy revolution. This mineral brinkmanship is the final desperate leverage of a nation pushed to the edge, a high-stakes play to remind the Trump administration that in a deeply integrated world, pain is a two-way street, but the real-world consequences for the people behind the numbers are harrowing. In the American Midwest, the tariff tax on Canadian electricity and oil is already threatening to spark a winter of discontent, with utility prices projected to climb by 15 to 20%. In the Canadian Maritimes, the lobster and crab industries, which briefly breathed a sigh of relief following the China deal, now face a double-zero scenario, blocked by U.S. tariffs and potentially discarded by a Beijing that sees Canada as too unstable a partner. Livelihoods are being ground between the gears of two shifting tectonic plates. Expert analysis suggests that the only viable off-ramp is a total overhaul of the USMCA that incorporates a digital and security perimeter. This would require Canada to align its tech standards, cybersecurity protocols, and even its immigration policies directly with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, effectively trading a portion of its national sovereignty for economic market access. It is a security for trade pact that would redefine what it means to be an independent nation in the 21st century. As the clock ticks toward the 2026 review, the global community watches this canary in the coal mine. If the U.S. can successfully force its closest neighbor into total compliance through 100% tariffs, the rules of global engagement have changed forever. The invisible hand of the market is being replaced by the iron fist of the tariff. We are entering a period of strategic decoupling, where trade is no longer a tool for mutual prosperity, but a weapon of geopolitical alignment. For the worker on the factory floor in Windsor, or the trucker crossing the Ambassador Bridge, the future is no longer a straight line. It is a series of walls and barriers. The Great Reset of North American relations is here, and whether it leads to a new era of continental strength or a fractured, impoverished landscape of former allies, remains the defining question of our age. The border is no longer just a line on a map. It is a mirror reflecting the new harsh reality of a world where friendship has been replaced by leverage. The cost of the border. The era of the soft border is over. What started as a dispute over Chinese EVs has escalated into a battle for the very definition of North American sovereignty. As President Trump doubles down on his 100% tariff threat and Canada prepares for a siege economy, the cost of this conflict will be measured not just in dollars and cents, but in the trust of a century-old alliance. Will the continent emerge as a unified fortress? Or will the weight of these tariffs crush the spirit of cooperation that built the modern world? The decisions made in the coming weeks will echo for generations. We want to hear from you. Is this the necessary tough love required to protect American industry? Or is it a dangerous overreach that threatens our collective future? Share your thoughts below. This has been a deep dive into the new geopolitical front line.